Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how I made this portion of this animation, because the settings on the force fields I'm controlling in real time as it simulates. Not exactly real time, about 1 frame per second is what it was simulating at, but you'll get the idea what I'm talking about. Now, I have Blender open with this project, and you can see same exact thing right here going on. And I'm just going to show you how I did this in real, or just at the settings as it was simulating. Alright, I basically have 2 force fields in here. I have one that's just the generic force field, and I have a vertex. Now I have the vertex parented to the force field, but that's just because if I move the force field I want the vertex to move along with it. Alright, now what I want to do, first thing I'm going to do is clear out this cache so that we can start out over from the beginning. Now I have 9 sub-steps. Use as many as you need, but 9 seem to work halfway decent for mine. Alright, so I'm going to first off go to the force field and go to the physics settings, and I have the strength set to 0. Alright, going to go to the vertex, and it's also set to 0, and we'll adjust them from there. Alright, the first one we're going to adjust is vertex, but before we adjust it we need to go back to the simulation settings and actually start the simulation. Then I'll go to the vertex and see, right now all these particles are starting to fall, but nothing's really happening. Nothing's really affecting them other than gravity, friction, and stuff like that. Now I'm going to set this to 1 on the strength of the vertex. Now you can see the particles start to spin. That's because of the vertex, kind of like a tornado. And it will kind of draw the particles towards it while spinning. And if I was to set this to like 3, it's basically just going to make it go faster. And if I was to change it to -3, it's basically going to do the same thing but in the opposite direction. See, the particles are slowing down, and now they're going to start going the opposite direction. And the force field is what's controlling the particles. Now, without the force field itself up here, the generic force field, it's just going to keep getting longer and longer for the most part. It will eventually not get any longer. But I'm going to go to the force field settings, and if you give this a negative setting, it will pull the particles towards it. If you give it a positive setting, it will push the particles away. So right now I'm going to set this to, let's say, 100. And you should see it start to expand a little bit. 100 may not quite be enough, because you're having to overpower the vertex also. The vortex rather, not vertex. Let me try 500. Alright, yeah, if 500's working, you can see it start to push the particles out. Now let me go back to the vortex and change this to, let's just change it to 1. See, now you're creating a hollow spot in the middle. I can go back to the force field and see it's starting to push everything away. Now I can bring it back in by changing this to like a -250. Now it's going to start sucking the particles back in. And the good thing about doing this, whenever it's simulating like this, it's simulating slow because of the subframes. You have time to make adjustments, and to a degree you have time to think about the adjustments you're making. See, now it's starting to draw everything back in. At this point I'll go back to the vertex, and I want to change this to -3. I want to change the direction of it. See, you get some weird looking effects whenever you start changing these things. Go back to the force field, and I'm gonna make everything expand out again. I'll basically use a positive number to push out the particles. I'm going to choose 1000. And you can do other things with this too. Like down here you have a max distance. I'm going to turn on max distance, have it set to 8. Let's just say 10 meters. That means that it's only going, this force field is only going to affect what the particles out to 10 meters from the force field, which that's approximately 20 meters, which you see this mouse going, pointer going. Now let me change this to 20. See this little dotted ring? That's the distance represented by this, the max distance. Alright, let me go to the vortex. Let me change this to a 2. And then go back to the force field. And then I'm going to change this to a -100. See, that's a cool looking effect right there. Now, what would be the purpose of stuff like this? Are you really going to do any serious animations? Probably not. But if you want to make something somewhat visually pleasing to look at, then this is how you go about it, in my opinion. I mean, there's many other ways to go about it, but I think this is visually interesting to look at. Now I'm going to change this to a 250 to kind of push the particles out a little bit. Go back to the vertex. I want to change the direction, -3. Now that -3, it's so strong that it kind of canceled out the effects of the other force field. So let me change this to, let's say, 1000. Now it's going to start pushing it back out again. Now you got kind of a hollow tube. And then -1000. Bring it all in real quick. Go to the vortex, set a max distance, 25, enter. See, now this vortex will not affect any particles outside this dotted line. Go back to the force field, and I'm going to again push them out at 500. Now you could add a third force field and it would work pretty much the same exact way. You would just end up having 3 parameters to adjust. And obviously the more parameters you have to adjust, the more control you have, but also the more complicated it could be to get it to do what you want. I've only tried 3, and 3 was fine, but it was more difficult in a lot of ways to get it to do what I want, because trying to visualize in your head how 3 parameters are going to change how the particles react was a little bit more difficult for me. 2 is fairly easy. Alright, now I'm going to set this to 0. Now these particles should kinda fall, I would think. Yeah. But that force field, or pardon me, the vortex is still kind of holding it up a little bit. I'm going to change the settings to 0 and see how everything's kind of expanding out, because both the force field and the vortex will draw particles towards it. Now, with nothing going on, I'm going to take this force field and I'm going to set it to 1000 to push everything out real quick. And then I'm going to set it to 0. Basically just gave it a nudge to push it out. Then I'm going to take its vortex and go -5. Now it's going to pull everything back in, and then it's going to start spinning. Of course, it's only going to pull things back in, pull the particles back in that's within this dotted line that you can see. Now if I was to set this, basically uncheck this so that there's no max distance, then yeah, it will start pulling everything back in. It's kind of like a little dance of particles. Let's set this to -1 to go a little bit slower. Go up here to this force field. Let's turn off the max distance and then set it to a -1000. Now it's going to start pulling everything back in. I'm going to take the vortex, set that to 0. So the only thing right now acting on it is the force field, and it's basically acting like a magnet. It's just sucking everything in. And because there is no max distance setting, all the particles in the scene are being drawn towards us. Now at this point, some of the particles have to be underneath this plane. So if I was to get out of the camera and then look underneath, yeah, see some particles underneath. Not that many. I figured there'd be a lot more than that, but yeah. And you can just let this go however long, or keep adjusting parameters until you have the scene you want to have. And whenever you get done, or get as far along as you want, which I'm just going to set this to 0 now, basically release the force field, and then the particles are just, any force that's on them right now is just inertia and gravity. And it will take probably another minute for the particles to completely settle, which I'm not going to wait. And then whenever you get to the point you want to end the simulation, you just accept or select your emitter object, and then look in your molecular plus settings and hit cancel. Now I didn't mention this earlier, but I am using molecular plus. Most people know what that is. It's a separate add-on. I will put the link to molecular plus add-on in the description of this video. And then it's a good habit to get into, especially if you stop a molecular script or molecular plus add-on before it finishes the simulation, is to make sure you have your emitter selected, which is what this is. It's the emitter that creates the particles. Go to your particle settings over here, and then just click on current cache to bake. Sometimes you don't need to, sometimes you do. With the newer molecular plus, I have seen it glitch very little compared to the older versions, and you hardly ever have to do this, but it doesn't hurt to do that, just to click current cache to bake. It just ensures that the cache files are locked in and saved. And then you just click save, and we'll go back to the beginning and see what it looks like. Nothing exactly spectacular. But anyway, this isn't exactly a tutorial, just something a little bit more in depth of an explanation. I may eventually do a full tutorial, but it won't be much different than this. This right here, the only difference between this and a full tutorial is I'm just explaining what I'm doing instead of like teaching, I guess you could say. And also, if I was to do a full tutorial, it would almost work better if the person already was familiar with the Molecular Plus add-on. Now I do have some Molecular Plus tutorials on my channel. I don't have that many, but they're there. But anyway, I think that's it. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Later, people.